No one knows for sure, but I intend to find out. Reboot!
What if I told you that one of the most groundbreaking cartoons of the 90s, one that literally changed animation history, was hiding dark secrets, behind-the-scene chaos, and disturbing themes that flew way under the radar for years? I'm talking about Reboot, the very first fully computer-animated TV series. It wasn't just a fun digital world full of sprites, viruses, and GameCubes. No, behind the kind, friendly digital veneer was a show with censorship wars, adult themes buried in code, and a final season that spiraled into something so dark that it practically traumatized its fans. And trust me, once you've seen the truths behind Reboot's development, character stories, and corporate interference, you'll never look at it the same way again. Especially when you find out what the creators originally planned to do with Enzo. But you better stick around because the wildest stuff doesn't even come until the end. Let's rewind to 1994. Kids were still watching Saturday morning cartoons, and Toy Story hadn't even hit theaters yet.
We lost many dear friends before Bob came to Mainframe and helped us defeat the user.
Out of nowhere, a Canadian production company called Mainframe Entertainment dropped Reboot, the world's first fully CGI television series. It blew minds. Everything was digital. The characters, the backgrounds, the effects. It was like nothing we'd ever seen. But here's what most people don't realize. Reboot didn't just push animation tech forward. It fought tooth and nail to even exist. The creators, Gavin Blair, Ian Pearson, Phil Mitchell, and John Grace, originally pitched the show as being full of edgy humor, sci-fi grit, and layered references. The idea? A computer world called Mainframe, where every character represented parts of a computer system. Sprites were programs, binomes were data, and viruses were, well, exactly what you think. And games? Literal cubes that crushed down and transformed the world into gladiator arenas where losing meant erasure. Oh yeah, permanent death. But there was a massive catch. American censors. In the US, ABC picked up the show, and they freaked out at some of the show's darker themes. Reboot was originally supposed to have more mature jokes, direct references to death and corruption, and even romantic tensions that pushed boundaries. Instead, ABC forced the creators to tone down the first season heavily. For example, Megabyte's original characterization was supposed to be even more sadistic and terrifying, closer to a Bond villain crossed with a horror monster.
She was so careful, so secretive. I knew she was up to something.
But here's the kicker. The creators never gave up. They snuck in jokes, subtext, and symbolism wherever they could. Want proof? Let's talk about what happened with Enzo next. When Reboot first started, Enzo Matrix was the plucky, energetic kid who looked up to Guardian Bob and wanted to be a hero. He was cute comic relief. But then something unprecedented happened. The writers aged him up, and they did it fast. In Season 3, after a GameCube launches Enzo into the unknown without Bob, he returns years later as Matrix, a jaded, gun-wielding anti-hero with PTSD, trust issues, and a literal body trauma. That's right, Enzo literally lost an eye in the original storyboard, and the creators almost went through with it before toning it down to just a scar and an ocular implant. This wasn't just character growth, this was a message. Reboot grew up with its viewers. It showed how war, loss, and survival reshape innocence, and this shift freaked out the network. In fact, Season 3 wasn't even aired in the US until years later because it was considered too dark. The scene where Matrix confronts a corrupted version of his younger self, that wasn't just psychological, it was terrifying.
Enzo, what's happening? I don't know. My life is rewinding before my eyes. Basic! I know you are, but what am I?
Fans even speculated that Enzo's internal journey was inspired by trauma-based dissociation. One theory? Matrix didn't survive the games, and the rest of the series is his dying mind creating closure. You think that's wild? Wait until you hear what was originally planned for Dot. Dot Matrix was more than the strong female lead. She was a businesswoman, a strategist, and arguably one of the most emotionally complex characters on the show. But behind the scenes, her story almost went into uncomfortable territory. Initially, the creators planned to have Dot fall into a romantic relationship with Bob and Matrix, without realizing Matrix was her younger brother aged up. Yep, it was supposed to be a love triangle. Once they realized the implications, they backed off. But some early scripts and notes show that emotional tension between Dot and Matrix was very much on the table. And even after scrapping the triangle idea, the show leaned heavily into romantic subplots. Dot and Bob's will they won't they dynamic was central by season 4, but fans noticed something odd. Dot's design and dialogue became increasingly sexualized.
We'll be downstairs if you need us. Bob's going to mend a tear that showed up after the last game. Okay, coolness.
Behind the scenes, animators admitted that the team felt pressure to make Dot more appealing to older male viewers during the show's relaunch. So why did season 4 feel so off? That leads us straight into the series' biggest controversy. After a long hiatus and cancellation cliffhanger, Reboot came back in 2001 with 2 made-for-TV movies that were later chopped into episodes, Damon Rising and My Two Bobs. Sounds exciting, right? Wrong. Fans were divided. First, there was a major tone shift. The style was darker, more adult, and leaned into unresolved subplots, but also lost a lot of the charm. Characters looked stiffer, the humor was inconsistent, and worst of all, the plot got messy. My Two Bobs tried to explore identity and cloning, but ended up in chaos. There were 2 Bobs, one was the original and the other was a clone made by Megabyte. But the show never fully resolved who was who. The final episode ends in a literal musical number, right before Megabyte returns in a horrifying new form and says he'll start a systematic campaign of chaos and destruction. And then, nothing. The show was cancelled again. No resolution, no closure, just a nightmare cliffhanger.
Viruses are predatory by design, and it is time for me to follow my function. Prepare yourselves for the hunt.
So here's what you didn't know. The creators had a full 5th season outlined that would have explained everything. Matrix was supposed to discover a second secret mainframe. Dot and Bob were going to have a child. Megabyte's new form was meant to reveal a hidden virus deep in the net that created him. But all of it got scrapped. Why? Internal studio issues, funding cuts, and loss of rights. Some of the creative team have said that season 4 was plagued by executive interference, rewrites, and a rush to deliver, resulting in a final product that was unrecognizable. Alright, now let's switch to the 2 biggest villains in the mainframe. Literally. Megabyte and Hexadecimal are easily 2 of the most iconic and terrifying antagonists in 90s animation. These aren't your typical bad guys with evil monologues and mustache twirls. These are intelligent, manipulative, and downright creepy computer viruses whose very presence disrupts the entire balance of the mainframe. Megabyte is the cold, calculated virus who wants to infect and dominate. He's all logic, control, and precision. He was more than a typical cartoon villain. He represented corruption, infection, and systematic decay. But according to one of the writers, Megabyte was based on real concepts of corporate control. The reason why he always infected systems through manipulation and fear rather than brute force? It was symbolic.
Ah, there you are, Father.
Mainframe Entertainment was allegedly going through its own internal strife, executives imposing changes, overruling creatives, and infecting the original vision of the show. And Megabyte's transformation in season 4 into a new, upgraded viral form, that was literal metaphor. He stops playing the system from the shadows and goes full-on tyrant, just like what was happening behind the scenes. Even Megabyte's voice actor, Tony Jay, admitted in interviews that he leaned into a more Shakespearean, almost satanic performance because he saw Megabyte as a tragic villain, a character who believed he was right in destroying the system. Hexadecimal, on the other hand, is wild chaos. She's unpredictable, erratic, and prone to surreal emotional outbursts. Together, they're like a yin and yang of viral destruction. But here's where things get truly fascinating. They weren't always 2 separate entities.
Besides,
All he has to do is ask nicely.
Show creator Gavin Blair once revealed that Megabyte and Hexadecimal originally started out as a single super virus named Gigabyte. That's right, one ultra-powerful digital monster. According to the lore, when the Gateway Command was destroyed, Gigabyte was split into two separate beings, Megabyte and Hexadecimal. That alone was wild, but it gets even creepier. Later in the series, the two viruses temporarily reunite, literally merging back together to form a horrifying creature, a fusion of brute force and unstable madness. It's an absolutely terrifying moment in the show, and when you realize that this abomination was their original form, you start to understand why the Guardians had such a hard time keeping things under control in the Mainframe. You start to realize Reboot wasn't just a digital adventure, it was a warning. A story about what happens when systems lose their balance, when power goes unchecked, and when innocence, like Enzo, is forced to grow up too fast in a world that doesn't care. And the real tragedy? It predicted our current digital age way too well. Reboot gave us tons of memorable characters like Mouse, Fong, Dot, Enzo, but none had the same lovable goofball energy as Hack and Slash. At first, these two were Megabyte's bumbling henchmen. And yeah, they were technically villains, but come on, you couldn't help but love them.
There is no number for walking nibbles.
Well, that means he just ran away.
Yep, that is right. He ran away, all right.
He's gone.
He is. Look at him go.
They were more dim-witted than dangerous, and their antics brought much-needed comic relief to some otherwise intense plot lines. As the series progressed, Hack and Slash slowly broke away from their villainous roles. In a brilliant twist, Fong reprograms them, literally giving them icons and freeing them from Megabyte's control. From then on, their mission was to protect Dot Matrix at all costs. What's even cooler, the chemistry between the two voice actors was so natural that much of their banter was improvised. Slash was voiced by the legendary Gary Chalk, who also voiced Optimus Primal in Beast Wars, and Hack was first voiced by Phil Hayes, then later by Scott McNeil, who was another 90s voice acting powerhouse. Their friendship, loyalty, and hilarious one-liners made them fan favorites. In fact, some fans argue that Hack and Slash are the emotional core of the series, providing humor, heart, and even sacrifice in a world full of digital danger. Now here's something that'll mess with your head. Even though Reboot ran for 4 full seasons, the entire timeline of the show was originally supposed to take place over just 4 weeks. That's right. Bob showing up, Megabyte and Hexadecimal unleashing chaos, the war with the web, and even Enzo growing into Matrix, all within a month.
My dear Fong, now you really are the keeper of the core.
Now, that's some compressed storytelling. Of course, as the series went on, the creators clearly bent the timeline to accommodate longer story subplots, especially in later series when the tone got darker and more serialized. But in its original conception, Reboot was designed to represent how fast things can change in a computer system. Viruses, upgrades, system crashes, all happening in the blink of an eye. It's a fun detail that shows just how deep the metaphor went for this groundbreaking show. Throughout the series, there are constant references to the user. Games randomly crash down into Mainframe, changing the terrain and forcing the characters to compete in strange and often deadly environments. Every time this happened, the Guardians would rush in to stabilize things and Reboot into avatars, essentially joining the game to try to beat the user. But what's truly genius about this setup is the underlying twist. The user is us. Yup, the real-world person sitting at the computer. The actions we take, like installing programs, launching games, restarting the system, have direct consequences for the people inside the show's digital universe.
Wait here. I'll get the others out. No, I'm okay. I'll help.
To the characters of Reboot, users are godlike figures. They don't fully understand us, but they know we exist. They worship, fear, and resent the users all at once, and yet they're completely invisible to us. We're just clicking around, dragging files, playing a round of Doom, and not realizing we're potentially destroying digital lives in the process. It's an insanely clever idea, especially for a kid's cartoon in the 90s. And it adds a layer of philosophical depth to Reboot that makes you pause the next time you boot up your laptop. Who's really in control? Here's another shocking fact. Reboot may have aired on networks like ABC and YTV, but don't let that fool you. This show was loaded with adult references that flew over kids' heads. The writers had a blast slipping in video game Easter eggs, sci-fi nods, and inside jokes for older viewers. Over 30 classic video games are referenced throughout the show's run. From Mortal Kombat to Street Fighter to Doom, there were even direct nods to horror movies like Evil Dead and The Thing. But one of the wildest examples came in Season 2 in an episode titled Trust No One. That alone is a direct X-Files reference, but the creators went all in. The episode features two mysterious agents, Fax Modem and Data Nully, a not-so-subtle parody of Fox Mulder and Dana Scully. And here's the kicker. Actual X-Files star Gillian Anderson lent her voice to Agent Nully.
There's been a rash of disappearances in Mainframe.
Fong sent us to investigate the most recent case, Al's waiter.
At the time, Anderson was married to a staff member at Mainframe Entertainment and agreed to the cameo just for fun. But her co-star, David Duchovny, not so much. He declined the opportunity, reportedly calling it just a silly kids show. Ouch. Joke's on him though, because fans loved the episode, and it became one of the most talked about moments in the series. Alright, one last quick fact that'll blow your mind. Our heroic guardian, Bob the Defender of Mainframe, rebooting champion, glitch-wielding icon, was almost named Chip, like a computer chip. The creators thought it was a clever tie-in to the tech theme, but ultimately decided that Chip was a little too on the nose. Bob was meant to be plain and relatable, an everyman name for a character who embodied heroism in the digital world. In hindsight, it was a brilliant move. Bob became one of the most recognizable names in 90s animation.
You're more valuable right here, Enzo. Stay and patrol the perimeter. If you spot anything strange, be sure and report it to your sister, okay?
Yes, sir!
Let's be real, Chip and Dot just doesn't have the same ring to it. Now, let's talk about the reboot that made fans rage. In 2019, Netflix and Rainmaker Entertainment released Reboot: The Guardian Code, a live-action CGI hybrid that tried to reboot the original series. Fans hated it. Why? Because it wasn't Reboot. The original characters were gone or sidelined, the tone was juvenile and derivative, and the deep themes of AI, identity, and survival were replaced with bland high school drama and evil hacker plots. Even worse, the original characters like Bob, Dot, and Enzo were turned into background cameos, glorified Easter eggs. Fans were furious. They called it an insult, a betrayal, and some even started online campaigns demanding it be removed. What's shocking is that some of the original creators had nothing to do with the reboot. They weren't consulted, they didn't even approve, and some publicly distanced themselves from it. But here's the real twist. The Guardian Code may have killed the chance for a real, proper reboot revival. The backlash was so loud and the ratings so bad that the entire franchise was put on ice.
It is your command post and your transfer station.
I'm not too crazy about that transfer part.
Wimp.
Initiating gateway access.
So, what's left of Reboot now? Just theories, cult fandom, and one last disturbing mystery you probably never noticed. So, now you know, Reboot wasn't just ahead of its time. It was warning us about control, about loss, about digital identity, and most of us missed it. Alright, so now that you've seen what was hidden behind the bright polygons and game sprites, it's impossible to unsee it. If you enjoyed this deep dive and want more shocking behind-the-scenes truths about your favorite childhood shows, hit that like button, subscribe, and let me know in the comments which cartoon I should totally reveal next. Because around here, we don't just rewind nostalgia, we reboot it. See you next time.